Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to let everyone know, if you haven't gone out there to the website that Bridget has set up for our feast, it's at feastgoer.org/metamorph_spring/New Braunfels, and that's one word there, .html. Go out and check that out. She did a really great job, very professional. It's really nice to look at that. So today's message is God gave us His Word. Now, God has given thousands of promises all throughout the Bible, and it's important for us to understand that God keeps His promises, and He does what He says He will do. If it appears to us that God did not keep a promise, we need to go back and examine the actual promise and follow it through the Bible to see why it appears that He reneged on His word. We have to keep in mind that there are two types of promises in the Bible. There's the promise that is an absolute declaration, and these are unconditional. They're going to happen no matter what. There's nothing that man can do to change it. An example of that would be God said to Noah that it was going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. That was an absolute declaration. He said it, and He did it. Then there's the promise that is a conditional statement. These are promises that depend upon our cooperation with God. These promises have stipulation requirements. We can look in Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 and 2. So let's turn there. In Deuteronomy 28, here's an example of one of His promises that is a conditional statement. I'll do this if you do that. Now in verse 1, and it shall come to pass, if you shall hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord your God, to observe and to do all His commandments, which I command you this day, that the Lord your God will set you on high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come unto you and overtake you if, and He is going to reestablish this condition now, if you shall hearken unto the word of the Lord your God. Now, we can drop down to verse 15 in this same chapter. We're going to find out the consequences. This is what will happen if we fail to uphold our end of the bargain. Deuteronomy 28, verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if you will not hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God, to observe to do all His commandments and His statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. And then in the next few verses, he lists a few curses that will happen. Not pretty. So, if you are thinking that God didn't follow through on one of His promises that He made, you need to go back in your Bible and examine that promise more carefully and more thoroughly. You're going to find that He didn't renege on His word at all. You'll find that it was a conditional promise, and someone breached their end of the deal. When God makes a promise, He gives us His word. God does not lie. He can't. So you can have faith in His word. Now, as far as man goes, an agreement between word and deed these days seems to be a thing of the past. You used to be able to make a deal with your word, and a handshake would seal that deal. The handshake was a symbol between the parties involved, and that they would hold up their end of the bargain. Now, people these days are more interested in material things, and if you want to be trusted, you can't just give your word anymore. You have to offer material possessions as a collateral to get someone to trust you. But with God, His word is good yesterday, today, and forever. How do we know that? He said so. He gave us His word. We can use Abram as an example here in Genesis 12. Let's read verses 1 through 3. Now, I know David covered these verses last week, I think, but we're going to look at them from another perspective. Genesis 12, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, so he verbally gave Abram his word, get you out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you, and curse them that curse you. And in you shall all families of the earth be blessed. So God promised Abram. God gave him his word that he would show him the way to a promised land. God gave Abram his word that he would be a great nation. God gave Abram his word that his name would be great. God gave Abram his word that he himself shall be a blessing. And God gave Abram his word that all families of the earth shall be blessed because of him. These are some fantastic promises. And when reading throughout the Bible and looking back through history, we can see the fulfillment of these promises. And we can look throughout the Bible at numerous other promises and how God made them and how he kept them to this day. God gave us his word. God keeps his word. Now, there's something else I want to point out here in case anyone's thinking Abram was someone special to God and that's why God gave him these promises. But maybe you don't see yourself as being special, so why should God make promises to you? Well, Abram's name isn't mentioned in the Bible until you get to Genesis 11:26. And then it's mentioned a couple more times in a few of the next verses. But in those verses, he's only mentioned by name, along with some others in this genealogical breakdown. The point I'm making is there's no mention of him being a great man or a great warrior. There's no mention of Abram being wealthy or powerful. There's no mention of him being highly educated or even knowledgeable. There's nothing special mentioned about this man Abram at all. We just hear his name a couple times. But then in the very next chapter, in Genesis 12, verse 1, God starts giving him great promises. You can look for yourself. Back in Genesis 11:26, we hear that Terah begat Abram, which means he was born. Then, a few short verses later, God's making him promises. Of course, you'll notice in Genesis 12, verse 4, that in those few short verses, since he was begat, Abram had aged 75 years. But in that 75-year time frame, we heard nothing special about Abram. Now, all of a sudden, God's giving him great promises. Well, what makes Abram so special, you might ask? I'm sure Abram was asking himself the same question most of us ask ourselves. Why me? Why are you calling me, God? What makes me so special? I mean, God, you know better than I do the things that I said and the things that I did back there. They were definitely not special. Yet you called me. I mean, this is because we're looking at this thing from the wrong perspective. God doesn't call us because we are special. We are made special because God called us. And when God calls us, we have to hold up our end of the promise, our end of the bargain, so that we may be found worthy to be one of the chosen. And if you're running around like most people in the world these days, thinking that you can run your own life according to your own fleshly desires, putting very little or no faith at all in God's promises, in God's word, you're going to find that it doesn't work. You're going to find that you get to a point where your whole world seems to be collapsing. Then and only then do you fall to your knees and pray to God to bail you out of this predicament. Oh, please, 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 help, help, help. I promise, I promise, I promise. You say whatever you think it takes to get God to listen to you. And then when it seems that the situation subsides, you don't bother opening the prayer closet anymore until that next major disaster hits you. You forget all about God and go back to your worldly ways. And then everything happens all over again. And keep in mind, there are stipulations involved. You cannot keep taking. You have to give to receive. God is asking you to do something, and he in return will do something. So there will come a time when God asks, what have you done for me lately that I should grant you these wishes in your prayer? Whether you're living God's ways all the time or not, when you find that it seems your whole world's collapsing around you, this is a test of your faith. How are you going to handle this test? God's watching your actions. Faith is an action, and doing God's word is one of the ways to put your faith into action. And knowing that God keeps his promises is putting faith into action. Now, he doesn't want you to just have faith and just sit there. If your world's falling apart, you have to do your part. Now, this scenario may sound familiar to some of you. It came up in a prayer of mine a few years ago because my faith was being tested. It had something to do with your life falling apart so rapidly, and you're praying to God to help you out of this seemingly endless tunnel. When you see a light at the end of the tunnel, so you start running towards it only to find out that it's a headlight of a train racing right towards you. So you can't just stop there and ask God, oh, please don't let that train hit me. You need to do something. I mean, God helps those who help themselves. He provides food for all the birds, but he doesn't run a delivery service. He doesn't just throw the food in their nests. They have to go out and apply some effort. So you need to turn around and run in the other direction and continue praying. You want to pray and ask God to help you out of this tunnel or out of this mess. Pretty soon you emerge out of that tunnel and you start to cross a canyon, but you find out that the bridge is out. Now you're falling down this canyon into this raging river. Well, on your way down, you should be praying to God. And in that prayer, before you ask him to help you survive that fall, don't forget to thank him for getting you out of that tunnel. He did answer that prayer. He got you out of that tunnel. Don't forget these things. He's testing you. Now, when you hit the water, you resurface. You find that you've landed in a pool of water off to the side of the raging waters, so you think you can relax and catch your breath. Then you realize, well, wait a minute. That train that I saw in the tunnel up there, he's going to try to cross that same bridge that isn't there. So he's going to be coming straight down on top of me. So you need to start paddling real fast. And you better be praying to God. And in that prayer, don't forget to thank him for helping you survive the fall. Because again, he did answer that prayer. Don't overlook that, and don't let your new problems overwhelm you to the point that you forget to thank him for his answered prayers. Remember, these are all tests of your faith. Rarely do we give credit to God for being faithful to his word. So put your faith in God. He said he would provide a way out of all situations. We know this because he gave us his word. How do you know that? Well, he put it in writing. It's called the Bible. And anytime you find yourself in times of trouble, God's testing you. But the best part about this, it's an open book test. So open the book, and all the answers are in there. God's testing your faith. And going back to Abram, whose name was later changed to Abraham, Abraham put his faith in God. I mean, he really put his faith in God. God promised him Isaac, his only begotten son, and now Isaac himself was born as an answer to one of the promises of God. And later, God puts Abram's faith to the test. We know the story. Abram ties Isaac down and raises the knife. And that's proof enough to God, so he stops him from sacrificing Isaac and provides a ram instead. Now, Abraham's faith in God was honored. God promises to honor your faith, but before God honors your faith, it may well be tested to the full first. And always keep in mind that God said that he will never give you more than you can handle, and he will always provide a way out. He gave us his word. How do we know that? Well, through Joseph and Mary, he literally gave us his word in flesh. So he gave us 3 avenues to provide us his word. He spoke it, he wrote it, he was it. So remember, do not accept the mark, and let's make all our days worthy of God's promises and blessings. Thank you.
You know, the Bible predicted destruction of individual city-states in the past that existed long, long ago. And all the prophecies came to pass. It predicted that the house of Israel would be scattered, along with the house of Judah. They were, for their national and individual sins. The Bible predicts much more than that for the end of the age, however. It predicts earth changes that could lead to an extinction-level event, which means that all life would be wiped off planet Earth unless God Almighty sends his Son, Jesus Christ, to prevent it. Notice Jeremiah 30, verse 4 to 7. And these are the words that the Lord spoke concerning Israel and concerning Judah. For thus says the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask you now and see whether a man does travail with child. Wherefore or why do I see every man with his hands on his loins, holding his stomach, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness? Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Now, if there is a time coming in this world that nothing else will ever been like it before or after, shouldn't we know about it? Should we have doubts like doubting Thomas, a high C personality, said, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know that it's going to happen? No, we've got to be like the eyes. Put a star by my name because I believe it. It's going to be fun. I'm going to watch it. It's going to be like fireworks. Well, the time setting for the verses there in Jeremiah 30, verse 4 to 7, is when Jesus Christ returns to this earth. It's in verse 9 to 11 of Jeremiah 30, and also Ezekiel 37, verse 24 to 28. Because Jesus Christ is going to raise up King David, who is currently dead and in the grave. He's going to raise him up to rule as king over Israel. Now, what could be such devastation that would come upon nations that will nearly destroy every nation on earth, including Israel, but they will be saved out of it? When Jesus Christ walked the earth in the flesh, the disciples heard him talking about the temple being destroyed, along with the city of Jerusalem, of course. They also heard him talk about the end of an age and the dawning of a new age in which he would rule the world personally once he destroyed the beast and the false prophet and their system. He said that King David, under Jesus' authority, will rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. He later revealed that the 12 tribes of Israel would be ruled over by one of the original disciples, except the one who fell away and was replaced. Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote of the questions that the disciples had concerning the signs of Jesus' second coming to establish that kingdom. I'm going to mention one in passing. Luke 21, verse 25 and 26, it says that Jesus gave a great warning. Here's what he said: "And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things that are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." Now here is described an event that originates in what is called the heavens. Now we have three heavens. Number one, where the birds fly. Number two, outer space. Number three, God's throne. Whatever this is will cause the sun, the moon, and the stars to appear differently to us than they do now. The word distress in these verses, that it would bring great distress of the nations, it's number 4928 of the Greek section of the Strong's Concordance, and it means anxiety, anguish. Webster's Unabridged Dictionary gives this meaning: pain or suffering, anguish of body or mind. If you see something that is coming out of the heavens, and it is so awesome that it causes your heart to fail, where does that originate? It originates the fear in the mind. And so it said that there's pain and suffering, anguish of body and mind. The word perplexity here in Luke 21, 25 to 26 means a state of quandary. It means to have no way out. So here is the human race looking up into the sky, and they see no way out of utter destruction. Just like the dinosaurs don't roam the earth anymore, but certainly their skeletal systems are dug up. An extinction level event. Webster says of the word perplexity, confused mental condition because of a disturbing, puzzling state of affairs. This is an event seen in the skies that people will think they have no way to escape from it. Death is a given. That's what they will think. What could be so terrible that Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 22, the first part of the verse, "And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved." When you look the word saved up in the Greek section of the Strong's Concordance, it could mean spiritual or physical. And since this is talking about flesh being saved, it means being saved alive rather than everyone dying. So it's going to require a supernatural intervention by Jesus Christ to prevent this planet from dying. Everything on it. Scientists talk about a lost continent called Atlantis. The lost continent, did it really exist? None of us have been there. Could it be that nations have been destroyed before, with few people remaining alive, but did not record the causes of the destruction and why their nation disappeared or a whole continent disappeared? A man by the name of Solon, S-O-L-O-N, who was a Greek historian. He was a philosopher and a statesman in Athens, Greece, between 639 and 559 BC. He traveled to Egypt and interacted with the historians from Egypt in his day, because Egypt was the greatest nation at that time. It had detailed records, great libraries of things that happened in the past. He made notes and writings from the Egyptians' history books. On one such visit, the Egyptian priests, who were pagan, but still they have eyes, they can read, they can write and record history, told Solon the following concerning the demise of Atlantis and how there were recurring cataclysms that caused destructions from time to time. I will quote from the book Pole Shift, the section that he talked about here. You Greeks are but children. There is no old doctrine handed down among you, but by ancient traditions or any science, which is of age. I will tell you the reason behind this. There have been and will be again many destructions of mankind out of many causes. The greatest having been brought about by earth fire and inundation, that means flooding. Whereas you Greeks and other nations did not keep records, imperishable records of Atlantis, we Egyptians did. And then after a long period of time, the usual inundation or flooding visits the earth like a pestilence and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. So the society died, except for the few. And thus you have to begin over again as children, having no knowledge as time raced by that there were events that happened in the past that were very devastating to the human race, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. End of quote. That was from John White's book, Pole Shift, page 38. In other words, what the ancient Egyptian priests were telling the Greeks, historian at this time, was that many civilizations throughout history of our planet have been wiped out by a recurring catastrophe, something that would come along ever so often. These civilization-ending cataclysms not only destroyed many ancient cultures that we're digging up and the artifacts from them to prove they existed, but their written records and recorded history as well, forcing them literally to start over as children. As time went on, they would forget what caused the destruction. Recorded historians did not exist in many of these societies. So it is that these global cataclysms occurred, but many people scoffed because they didn't have the accurate information. Today, I hope to give you some of the accurate information as to what this Bible prophecy that I've already read and many others, what it's all about. The Egyptians told Solon about the destroyed civilization called Atlantis. Atlantis was a series of islands that lay west of the Straits of Gibraltar, out into the Atlantic Ocean. Then the usual, as they said, inundation or flood struck the earth. It involved earthquakes and floods. They had a little warning. Atlantis was engulfed with ravages of the ocean. The waves overtook it, huge tidal waves. Finally, Atlantis slipped between and under the great tidal waves, the giant waves, 3,000 feet in height, never to be seen or heard from again, but they lay deep under the oceans. In 1828, the Museum of Leiden in the Netherlands obtained a copy of a very old and ancient text known as Ipuwer, I-P-U-W-E-R, papyrus. And this was recorded in a book. This text describes a massive cataclysm that struck Egypt thousands of years ago. And they set forth a remarkable understanding of what has happened to many civilizations in the past in this papyrus. Statements from it reveal that the nation was totally devastated. Agriculture was destroyed. Both the upper and the lower Egyptian became wasteland. Then we had the Great Sahara Desert as a direct result. Mr. A.H. Gardner wrote in a book concerning this particular papyrus that was in the Leiden Museum, quote, "It was no merely local disturbance that is here described, but a great and overwhelming national disaster," end of quote. Now, this ancient manuscript said that the earth turned upside down. What is turning upside down? Isn't that a pole shift? It said that the sky was in confusion. Why would the sky be in confusion? It was the earth that tilted on its axis, that was turned upside down and had a pole shift. Not the stars, not the sun, not the moon. They were constant as always. But it was from the perspective of human beings that the sky was in confusion. Could that have been referring to a time when the earth altered its rotation? We'll see. It's recorded in history that it has happened. Whatever it was, it destroyed an entire nation, its cities, its agriculture, its infrastructure, highways, and so on. A tablet was found in El Arish, which is a monument that was erected between Judea and Egypt. On this tablet was inscribed a hieroglyphic message referring to a time when a great geological disaster struck ancient Egypt. Here's what it read, quote, in part. This is from the book, The Greatest Story Never Told, page 83. The land that was Egypt was in great affliction. Evil fell upon us. There was a great upheaval. There was such a tempest that neither men nor gods could see the faces of those beside them. End of quote. That's dark. Darkness. So that you couldn't even see someone sitting right next to you or standing or laying next to you. Other cultures have recorded great cataclysms about ancient Egypt, that it struck that nation as well as their own. The same book, The Greatest Story Never Told, page 83, had this to say, quote, "An exceedingly strong wind endured 7 days. On the 4th, 5th, and 6th day, the darkness was so dense that they could not stir from their places. The darkness was of such a nature that it could not be dispelled by artificial means. The light of the fire was either extinguished by a violent storm, or else it was made invisible and swallowed up in the density of the darkness. Nothing could be discerned. None were able to speak or hear. Thus they remained overwhelmed by the affliction. End of quote. What is this talking about? We'll see very shortly. The earth tells a great story as to what happened, and the Bible confirms it and says that it's going to happen again. We have to ask ourselves what type of massive disaster could have caused such a physical disruption in Egypt, and other nations recorded it as happening to them also. The answer is actually handed down to us by the ancient Egyptians themselves. They maintain that these periodic planetary catastrophes involve the shifting of the Earth's rotation in space. Shifting of the Earth and its rotation. What would that do to everything on planet Earth and everyone? We will see shortly. Over 2,000 years ago, the historian Herodotus reported, and I quote, "The scribes of Egypt maintained that 4 times the earth in its movements reversed itself, so that the sun shifted and rose where it formerly set, and set where it formerly rose." At one time, the sun rose in the west and set in the east, but now rises in the east and sets in the west. That's what they were saying. Notice from the book Worlds in Collision, page 119, there was a Latin author by the name of Pomponius Pella who wrote in the 1st century. Here's what he said, quote, "The Egyptians pride themselves on being the most ancient people in the world. In their authentic annuals, they put down history year by year. One may read that since they have been in existence, the course of the stars has changed direction 4 times, and that the sun has twice set in the part of the sky where it now rises today." End of quote. Now, did the sun and the stars and the moon actually change locations? No. But the earth did, so it appeared that things in the heavenlies were changing. Remember, it's the earth that changed on its rotational pattern, not the sun, the stars, and the moon. There was a man which many of you have heard of, Pliny the Elder. He was a 1st century writer. He wrote, and I'm quoting from that same book, The Greatest Story Ever Told, page 78, "A terrible comet was seen by the people of Ethiopia and Egypt. It had a fiery appearance and twisted like a coil, and it was grim to behold. It was not really a star so much as what might be called a ball of fire. It was not a fiery color, but a bloody red." End of quote. Now, what type of strange red celestial object could this man Pliny the Elder be describing? Another ancient Greek, returning from Egypt, said this, and I quote, "There appeared a comet, and there was a conflict between the forces of heaven and of earth." Now, what are the forces of heaven and earth? Gravitational pulls. The earth is held in its place by gravity, centrifugal force, the laws that God set in motion for the earth to rotate around the sun. This is our solar system. So what caused this devastation upon the earth? Apparently it'll happen again according to scriptures. And I've only read one so far today, or two. Could this be why we come onto the scene in Genesis chapter 1 with an earth that lay in ruin, toho and boho, and it was desolate? And then God had to restore the earth because something had come through our solar system, and they described it in Egypt and in Greece as a great comet. But was it a comet? They said it came. People saw it, they wrote it, they recorded what happened and the results to the land, to the people, to the cattle, to agriculture as a direct result of it. God completed the restoration of planet Earth and told man to multiply and replenish. Anybody can go to the Strong's Concordance and look up the word replenish, and you will see that it says it means to repopulate the earth. Apparently, there was some kind of population on planet Earth before Genesis 1. When God came on the scene and the earth was in ruins. And now all of a sudden God started things and restored it all over again. Well, what did he say in Acts 3, verse 18 to 21? He said when Jesus comes and the heavens are holding him, and when he comes he will have to restore all things. Restore it from what kind of a condition? Well, it's already said if he didn't intervene, there would no flesh be saved alive, so something pretty devastating is going to happen to planet Earth. And inhabitants of this earth is going to know about it. They're going to see it because they're going to keel over with heart attacks. They're going to hold their stomach men as if they were delivering babies. Could this shifting of our planet's rotation and the accompanying geophysical changes to Earth have been ultimately triggered by the passage of this terrible red comet? And the reason I was teasing with our C-type personalities is because they have to see the facts, just the facts. And when I can put my hand in your side, as Thomas said, I'll believe. So when I see that red star in the sky, I'll believe. One problem, it's too late. Preparations must be taken ahead of time to get our lives right with Jesus Christ, to be one of those that are preserved. In Revelation chapter 8, verse 10 and 11, and the third angel sounded. This is when the trumpets were open. This is the third of those first ones. And there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the waters and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood. And the word literally means in the Greek language bitter or calamity. So something very calamitous took place. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. They were poisoned in some way because of something that fell on the earth. And it says it looked like a great star. So that means it was flaming. Was it flaming red? Did it actually fall on the earth, or particles from it fall on planet Earth that also went into the water systems and poisoned it? Did an ancient event involving an object that looked like a comet to those ancient people once ravage their cultures, and will it happen again? Bible prophecy. That's what we're talking about. Could Wormwood's passage have been God's way to cause those biblical miracles in conjunction with Him delivering Israel out of Egyptian bondage to occur? We'll wait and see in time. Because when we read what happened and how totally devastated Egypt was, and the results of what was written down by historians and their literature has been dug up, it's just possible that God may have used this in some way as a part of the deliverance. Many modern day scholars have tried to dismiss these ancient accounts that have been recorded as terrible comets, or maybe serpents in the sky as recorded in China, as being just meaningless mythology. Some have even said in their writings it's nothing but silly legends. Others have said that they were fairy tales. However, the ancient Egyptians and other cultures around those great cultures that were destroyed steadfastly maintain that these events actually happened and were an important part of their civilization's history. Notice what it says in the Old Testament of the Bible, because who was there in Egypt? Israel. Who delivered them? God did. Jesus Christ, before He came into human flesh and died for the sins of the world. Who inspired Isaiah to write? Jesus Christ. According to 1 Corinthians 10, 1-4, He led Israel out of Egyptian bondage. And it says it was Christ. So in Isaiah 24, the latter part of verse 18 through the first part of verse 20, for the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. What is the foundations? The gravitational pull, the centrifugal force, all those elements that God uses to stabilize planet Earth. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. That's all that I'll mention out of that. Then that brings us right back to a verse I've already mentioned, Acts 3, verse 18 to 21. Verse 18, I'll mention one word: repent. Because the heavens is holding Jesus Christ. And then on down in those verses it says, until the times of the restitution of all things. What does restitution mean? It means to restore to the original quality. So Jesus Christ is coming back to this earth, first to stop the extinction level event that will destroy every human being and every form of life on planet Earth. That's why He says to repent, so that we apparently can accept Him and be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. Now, I'm going to give some documentation now to confirm that the Bible is true in its prophecies and that exactly what it says is going to happen when Jesus Christ, immediately before Jesus Christ returns, has happened in the past and it will happen again. After many years of study in Egypt, scholars from Greece began to have a better understanding of these cataclysmic events that happened to our earth. Now keep in mind that I've already shown that they talked about something causing the earth to shift in its axis, or tipping of the earth in its rotational pattern throughout space. A man by the name of these Greek foreign names, It's all Greek to me. But anyway, in 348 BC, Timaeus described great cataclysms where he had talked with people of other nations, and especially Egypt, on his travels. He said that he was told by those accounts and shown in the records of their histories that the earth moved, and I'm quoting, forwards and backwards, and again to right and then left, and upwards and downwards, wandering every way in all 6 directions. End of quote. What did we see in Isaiah 24, verse 18 to 21? The earth would reel to and fro like a drunkard. Now, I've never been drunk myself. I've only taken a sip of alcohol about 3 or 4 times in my life. I just don't like the taste. But for a person who's drunk, I mean really drunk, and they're trying to walk this line and take this sobriety test, and they're just going from side to side, I can understand what the Bible's talking about, because they're reeling from one side of the line to the other. They're not stable in anything. Plato was one man that lived before in the BC period in Greece. He said that he had gone throughout the world looking for answers as to what had happened in the past, and he had come to the conclusion that there was destruction throughout the world. Whole continents, such as Atlantis, sank beneath the sea in a series of catastrophic events. Plato also records in his writings that the earth altered its rotation. I will quote, "The sun and the stars once rose in the west and set in the east." That's the opposite of today. "And of all changes of the heavenly motions, we may consider this to be the greatest and most complex. And it may be supposed to result in the largest changes to human beings that were the inhabitants of the world at that time." He completed that paragraph by saying, "Few survivors of the race were left." End of quote. Something happened, and the historians from ancient times knew it. Few survivors were left. Plato had a famous work called Politicus. It has to do with politics. Here's what he said, and I quote, "I mean in the rising and settling of the sun and other heavenly bodies, how in those times they used to set where they now rise, and used to rise where they now set. At certain periods the earth had its present circular motion, and at other periods it revolves in the reverse direction. Of all the changes which take place in the heavens, this reversal is the greatest and the most complete." End of quote. So there are documents, secular documents, not religious, that absolutely proves that the Bible has forecast something is coming that is going to be so terrible that all life on planet Earth will be exhumed unless Jesus Christ stops it. Other excerpts of Plato's from his famous work, quote, "The world turning round with a sudden shock, having received an opposite impulse at both ends, was shaken by a mighty earthquake, producing a new destruction of all manner of animals." End of quote. Now, what's at each end of the earth? It's called poles, North Pole, South Pole. All of a sudden, there was a sudden impulse that caused the poles to shift. Like in ancient Egypt, the ancient Greeks clearly describe several episodes in the past how the earth's alteration and rotation has changed. It began to spin in a new axis, making it seem as if the heavens were moving differently when it was only the earth that was moving differently. Many other ancient scholars also believe that the earth's rotation had in fact shifted numerous times in the past. The same scholars believe that the passage of a large celestial object, that's their words, was the actual cause of the rotational changes. Now, if this is a great celestial object, that means that it had to have great gravitational pulls. It had to be able to take Earth's gravity away from that of the sun temporarily, if it's to reel to and fro out of its orbit like a drunkard. Well-respected ancient scholars, men such as Leitus, Servius, and others, all believe that the shifting of the Earth's axis of rotation was what brought about the appearance of a large celestial object. That's what they say. These ancient authors repeatedly mention a terrible comet they called typhoon. Have you ever heard the word typhoon before? It's used in the Orient as great, powerful, to be exact, the greatest magnitude of hurricanes that causes the most destruction in the Orient. And they also describe it as having a bloody appearance in the sky and cause great destruction to earth, involving plagues, evils, and hunger. There was an ancient historian by the name of Plutarch, Plutarch, who also had direct contact with historians in Egypt. He was allowed to personally study in the great library of Alexandria, Egypt. From his studies, he believed that there was repeatedly something that came through the solar system, a great object that threw the earth into chaos. It appeared like a large comet, and it was called in the Egyptian writings typhoon. It was also referred to as the destructive, diseased, and disorderly comet because of the havoc that it wreaked on planet Earth. In his writings, he said, and he described, when a terrible comet by the name of typhoon caused a shifting of the Earth's axis on its rotational pattern. Here's what he said, quote, "The thickening air concealed the heavens from view." Are there scriptures in the Bible that says that we won't be able to see the stars, the moon, the sun, and certain ones in certain times that it will look and appear blood red? He went on to say, and the stars were confused with disorderly huddle of fire and moisture and violent fluxions of winds. The sun was not fixed to an unwandering and certain course. In other words, it looked like the sun was moving around so as to distinguish Orient and Occident, different locations on the earth. Nor did he, meaning the sun, bring back the seasons in order. End of quote. So something did happen that changed the seasons. They didn't come back to the normal seasons. We know that we have found tropical trees in Siberia frozen solid. Great mammoths that are oriental, that are actually tropical, have been frozen suddenly up in Siberia with tropical food still in its mouth. not even digested. So there had to have been something that caused this. There was a classical writer by the name of Hesiod, Hesiod. He described a great planetary conflagration and a flood several thousand years before that was brought about by the appearance of a heavenly body known as typhoon. He said the appearance of this terrible celestial body caused the earth to wobble in a strange manner and to ultimately shift its axis of rotation. When it shifted, it caused great destruction and a total altering of the earth's normal seasons. And it was caused directly from the passing of this typhoon. And the word typhoon in the Orient came from this event, described in all this literature. It's spelled with 2 O's in the Orient today, but it was 1 O in the writings. And the word typhoon in the Orient for these high magnitude hurricanes was used to describe powerful and destructive tropical storms because of what happened in the past. The ancient historian Diodorus Siculus, many people who had to take Greek literature have heard of him. He reigned during the time, or he lived during the reign of Julius Caesar between 60 and 30 BC. He recorded in the remote past, that was from his day in the past, that a celestial object that they call Aegis, Aegis, flew through the sky, raining fire upon the earth, setting forests and cities ablaze from India to Europe. Now think about that just for a minute. Is there any scriptures in the Bible, any at all, that might have any say-so about such happenings? Look in Revelation 8, verse 6 to 9. Revelation 8, verse 6 to 9. And the 7 angels, that's the 7 last trumps before Christ returns, which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to blow. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. It looked like blood because it was so red. It emitted dust from it that made the rivers look like they were blood, the streams. And they were cast upon the earth. And a third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. What did it say that happened way back a long time ago? The identical thing. Is it going to happen again? According to Revelation, it is. And the second angel sounded, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. Yes, it looked like it was blood because of the red that was emanating from it. And a third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And a third part of the ship were destroyed. Commerce world over, destroyed, shipping industry. And a third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. Yes, these are the trumpets, the first ones. Hail, fire, what looked like blood, the oceans, the rivers turning to blood. Could it have been this passing object? A little more description may help us. The ancient Greeks and Egyptians clearly possessed historical records of several cataclysms that have struck planet Earth in the past. Cataclysms that were so severe they altered the very rotation of the earth, making the moon, the stars, and the sun appear to move strangely in the sky when we know it was only the earth's irrational movement that caused that to look that way. Was the passage of this bloody comet known as Typhoon or Aegis the ultimate cause of these catastrophic changes to planet Earth in the past? Is that what is going to cause it to happen again in the future? Could our society, with all of its modern technology, be largely ignorant of these ancient accounts? Accounts that were at one time in the distant past considered common knowledge. To be exact, there's whole civilizations left today that are very anxious because they have said every 3,600 to 4,000 years, this comet of destruction comes through and they go up on mountains ever so often, every 52 days to be exact in some cultures, and look into the heavens to see if it's approaching. That's the anxiety that those cultures in South and Central America have till this day. Once again, the ancient Greeks and Egyptians seem to indicate by their written histories that these catastrophes happen suddenly and with little advance warning. These catastrophes came in a fixed timetable, every 3,600 to 4,000 years. Could it be that we could predict even today that we're getting close to this? Jesus Christ told us to watch when all these events in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 are about to come to pass, the entire book of Revelation, when they're about to come to pass, look up because something dynamic's going to happen. And it's not going to be just the return of Christ, not at first. It will be to save mankind. Even the Mayan civilizations right here in Central and South America, they have written in their literature that there were destructive cycles of the earth brought on by a great red comet. They have even literature. Part of that literature is called Popul, P-O-P-U-L, View, V-U-H. Here's what one section of that said. They, meaning the Maya, were inundated by a thick rosin dust that fell from the sky. The face of the earth was obscured and a rain of darkness began, raining day and night. And there was a great din of fire above their heads. The men were seen running about, pushing themselves full of despair. They tried to climb on top of the houses, but the houses collapsed to the earth. They tried to climb the trees, but the trees were shaken and thrown away. And then they tried to enter into the caves, but the caves closed in on them. Does that sound like Jeremiah 30, verse 4 to 7? Where men were standing there seeing this, whatever this was, coming in the skies, and they were holding their stomach. Men like they were giving birth to children. Men's hearts failing them, meaning mankind, men and women. And they would just keel over with heart attacks because they think there's coming an extinction level event. Oh yes, it's all there. It's in the history books. Something has happened in the past because when we came onto the scene in Genesis 1, the earth was desolate. What made it that way? Scientists can prove that the earth is about 4.5 to 5.5 billion years old. If it's that old, but man has only been here as we know it, approximately 6,000 plus years, then something happened back there that caused that destruction where God Almighty came on the scene, the Father and Jesus, in Genesis 1, and started the creation all over again, and then said, let us make man in our image. A pole shift is a phenomenon wherein the planet tilts on its axis. It's like a spinning top that falls onto its side. Basically, these pole shifts are accompanied by violent teutonic activity. Now that's the earth platelets that override one another, that creates earthquakes. They create volcanic eruptions, windstorms, global fires, floods, and great hurricanes. Has our weather been changing in the last 15 to 20 years? Has it been man-made only because they've discovered the use of extremely low-frequency magnetic waves? Or could it be that this object is coming, it's heading in our direction, and the earth is warming up, and that the earth is now having violent weather because of this? Notice what it says in Mark chapter 13. Mark excuse me. Mark chapter 13, verse 24 to 26. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened. You won't be able to see it. All the soot, volcanic ash, and the moon shall not give her light. Does it mean that the sun's not shining on it? No. They're still out there operating. And the stars of heaven shall fall, so it looks like they've disappeared. And the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. So something is going to shake the gravitational pull of planet Earth. Something is going to create troubles for mankind, such as has never happened before and never will again since we as human beings have currently been on planet Earth. Here's what the Maya said in their literature. Quote, "It was not known from where the new sun would appear. They looked in all directions, but they were unable to say where the sun would rise. Some thought the north, others the south. Some, however, fixed the attention of the Orient, that's the east, and maintained that the sun would come up from there. It was their opinion, the eastern rising of the sun, once all the ash cleared and they could see it again, it was their opinion that proved to be correct," end of quote. So something happened. The earth shifted. The sun came up in a different location. They knew that it would because they had documents, ancient documents, that this had occurred before with planet Earth. So like the Egyptians and Greeks, the Maya also have associated pole shifts with abnormal celestial phenomenon, something coming through the solar system. Remember, there is a group called Sumeria? You can look at old maps. In Sumeria, this is just south of Ur of the Chaldees. And in Sumeria, they have done archaeological digs. They have discovered the universe, our solar system, on their cuneiform or their written papyrus historical documents. On one of them, they found our solar system identical to the way we understand it today, with one exception. They found that these people knew of another planet. And we call it today Planet X because it would make 10 planets in the solar system. They said that it went in an elliptical pattern billions of miles out into space and orbited a dead star and came back and orbited our sun. And when it came through on the other side of the sun from where we are, that it would take about 3 years to reach its destination and come back close enough for it to affect planet Earth. They had it drawn, and this star was a part of the solar system. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because what I'm going to give you next. Zecharia Sitchin is a renowned scholar, author, and historian. He's translated the 6,000-year-old records of this ancient Sumerian civilization. He's from Britain. These records tell of a celestial object that we call Planet X, that the Samaritans believed passed through our solar system approximately every 3,600 years. The ancient Sumerian called this object Nibiru, which literally means the planet of crossing. It would cross our solar system and wreak havoc on all the planets. The ancient Sumerians believed that the periodic passage of this celestial object caused great changes of the earth, massive floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, and at times even causing the earth to alter its axis, pole shift. The Samaritan book called Enki, E-N-K-I, was discovered. In there, it talked about Nibiru's causing certain things to happen on planet Earth. Here's what the Sumerian text says, and I quote, "Now this is the account of the deluge," that's a great flood that over the earth swept. "For days before the day of the deluge, the earth was rumbling. Groan as with pain it did. For nights before the calamity struck, in the heavens Nibiru, as a glowing star, was seen. Then there was darkness in daytime, and at night the moon, as though by a monster, was swallowed." In other words, you couldn't see it. "The earth began to shake. In the glow of dawn, a black cloud arose from the horizon, and the morning light into darkness changed. Then the sound of a rolling thunder boomed. Lightnings, the sky lit up. In the white land, that's the polar ice caps, at the earth's bottom, that's the South Pole, and the earth's foundations were shaking. Then with a roar to 1,000 thunders, off its foundations the ice sheet slipped. So all the poles, the ice, began to go into the ocean. They went on to say, unseen net force. It was pulled away into the South Sea, crashing. All at once, a tidal wave arose. The very skies was the wall of waters reaching. So the waters were very high to where it was hard for you to see the horizon. The tidal wave northward was spreading. No one, his fellow man, could see. The ground vanished. There was only water. All at once, on the ground stood by the mighty waters, away was swept. No one except a few of us survived. End of quote. This was a description of the polar ice caps, the poles shifting, causing the earth to go out of its orbit, to reverse the way that it had once been rotating. It caused death everywhere among humans, plant life, animal life. Great tidal waves called tsunamis hit the coastlands of the world, wiping out, just as it had in the Indian Ocean and so on recently, thousands upon thousands of individuals. The gravitational pull was affected. Therefore, it caused the whole earth to rumble, ripping the earth crust apart, shifting its axis, knocking down the South Pole, setting off a giant tsunami. Think what happens when the earth crust goes to pieces. You have upheavals. Mountains go to the bottom of oceans and become oceans. Other places that were underwater suddenly rise and become the new mountains. This was what was occurring, and he was describing here. But you know, even in the King James Version of our Bible, it says the same thing. Notice what it says in Genesis 7, verse 10 to 12, about Noah. And it came to pass after 7 years that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 6th month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So here is a great flood, because the fountains and the great deep were broken up. Something caused it to be broken up. In Genesis 7, verse 17 to 19, then I'll drop down to verse 24. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark. And it was lifted up above the earth, and the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth. And the ark went upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. And all the high hills that were under heaven, the whole heaven were covered. Then verse 24, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So there have been earth changes that have affected the human race. Devastating changes. Look what it says in Enoch, the book of Enoch, chapter 64, verse 1 to 3. This is not in our Bible, but it's recorded. It's a book of history. In those days Noah saw that the earth became inclined and that destruction approached. Inclined to what? And he said, tell me what is transacting upon the earth, for the earth labors and is violently shaken. End of quote. Now the question is, when the book of Enoch says the earth became inclined, could that be referring to a pole shift? Because you know, when you have a bowl of water and you push it and it's full, and you push it quickly away from you and then back to you, it all flows to one side and spills over. That's exactly what happened with a flood. Something happened that caused the earth to break up all the waters, the undersea, underground oceans, so that there would be enough water to cover the hills and so on. Then in Isaiah chapter 24, you can read verse 1 to 20. I'm just going to read a small part of it. Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty, verse 1, and makes it waste, and turns it upside down. When you turn the earth upside down, that's a pole shift. No wonder there were few men left. When a pole shift takes place and great destruction, flooding and everything else, earthquakes, you read Revelation 12, the last verse before in chapter 6, the greatest earthquake that has ever hit this planet is going to take place. It'll be a global earthquake. But something happens. Suddenly God stops everything until he does something with some people to protect them from what is about to come. Now, I'll drop down to verse 20. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. So something will happen. I'm going to have to leave out a little bit today, but in Psalm 68, verse 8, it says, the earth shook. The heavens also dropped at the presence of the Lord. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God. Then look at Amos chapter 8, verse 8. Shall not the land tremble? Everyone mourn that dwells therein. It shall rise up wholly as a flood. It shall be cast out and drowned as by the flood of Egypt. And it shall come to pass in that day that I, that's the Lord, will cause the sun to go down at noon. And I will darken the earth in the clear day. Why? Because of a pole shift. Certain people on the earth won't be able to see the sun anymore. It went down because the earth flipped. It's nighttime on the side where you now are located. So these things have been happening. Universal stories from every continent on earth prove that there have been in the past great disruptions, and that there is going to be items once again that is going to disrupt civilizations. So I want to begin to bring this to a close right now. I want to put down in numerical order some of the things that these ancient history books have told us. Number one, the sighting of a massive red celestial object as it approaches the earth. They saw it. Number two, the object's effects upon earth were earthquakes, volcanoes, violent winds. Number three, the falling red dust from this caused the moon and the earth to turn blood red. Number four, hailstones of fire fell to the earth, setting a third of the forest on fire and burning up all the green grass. Number five, the sun, moon, and stars appeared to move erratically in the heavens. It wasn't them, but it was the earth. Number six, there was a deluge in the past, the overwhelming floods that swept across the lands. They've even found mountains with little tiny trilobites, that's sea creatures, on top of them. They've literally found the skeletons of whales at the highest peaks of some of the mountains. How did they get there? We've just been explaining how they got there. Number seven, the changing positions of the sun and moon, changing from night to day. These time sequences took place according to the ancient historians. Number eight, the destruction of civilizations and their ongoing future cultures took place. Number nine, the great human migration, foretelling their struggle to survive, has left us absolute proof as to why their civilization crumbled. Number 10, the destruction of ancient records, their accounts of them in their books, their traditions that are even oral, causing a blank period in Earth's recorded history of mankind. It can now be discovered why these blank periods have always been there. There have been books, documents, old writings, even oral traditions that still exist today. From the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Maya, the Toltecs here in the Western Hemisphere, the Inca, Aztecs, the Hopi Indians, Cherokee, the Norsemen from Norway, the Celts that were in England and Western Europe, the Chinese and the Eskimos. They all recorded the same events. And so it was. The original Sumerian writings said that the Earth's past was destroyed by this planet X that passed through the system, or it wreaked great havoc. So now in my final summation, 7 points. Number 1, a large celestial object traveling at incredible speeds from deep in space passes through our inner solar system. It's a fact of past history. Number 2, as this immense red object passes between the sun and the earth, it develops a large tail similar to that of a comet, but it is much more lethal or deadly than a comet. As this tail sweeps across between the sun and the earth, a rain of red dust, according to the ancient histories, and fire falls to the earth from the sky, causing the earth to be enveloped in some kind of a red dust that makes the moon and the sun appear to be red. It makes all the waters appear to be blood. Number 3, as this object quickly passes the earth within 2 to 3 days, its large gravitational effects cause the rotation of our planet to momentarily stop, making the stars, the sun, and the moon appear to be motionless in the sky. But as this object continues to pass the earth, the gravitational effect ultimately causes a complete shift of the earth on its axis, therefore making the sun and the moon and the stars look like they are moving instead of us. But it's the earth. Number 4, as the earth tips over in space as it flies around the planet or around the sun, violent winds form in the atmosphere. Great stress is placed upon the tectonic plates that compromise the crust of our planet. When they're compromised, great earthquakes, global in nature, begin to occur. Numerous volcanoes erupt. They send huge amounts of volcanic ash into the atmosphere. This is what blocks our view from the sun, the moon, and the stars. That's why the Bible used literary language and said the stars fell. They didn't actually fall. You just can't see them. Number 5, also the earth rotates, and sometimes it stops its rotation. Then it tips over. Volumes of seawater spills out of the ocean basins all over the land masses, producing great floods and giant tsunamis, tidal waves, as high as mountains. Number 6, once this object, Planet X, passes the Earth, which may take several days, it would swing around the sun and head back out into deep space, returning again another 3,600 to 4,000 years later because of its long journey. Number 7, in the meantime, back on Earth, the floodwaters eventually would begin to drain back into their basins after creating havoc everywhere. Jesus Christ would have to come on the scene to stop human annihilation and restore everything so that humans could continue to live. I want to mention, in summary, Jeremiah 30, verse 4 to 7, where everybody holds their stomach, heart attacks because of fear coming upon the earth. Revelation 8, 7 to 12, those 4 trumpets when they sound. A third of the earth burning, forest fires. The oceans roaring because of a giant asteroid that plunges into the ocean. Then another giant asteroid that plunges into a land mass. The water becomes bitter. People begin to die. God said in Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1, He would make the earth empty. It's not Him that's doing it necessarily. He's already set in motion the solar system. But for you and for me, I've got a lot of good news. This all sounds bad, and it is. A lot of people are going to be harmed by it. And we should be thankful to know about the resurrection from the dead. In Revelation 7, 1 to 4, before all of these things happen, and after these things, I saw 4 angels standing in the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth. And one of the ancient names for this Planet X was the 4 winds. And this is awfully interesting to me. He said it was holding back the 4 winds, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth nor on the sea or on any tree. And what did he see? Another angel ascending out of the east, having the seal of the living God. He cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, look, don't hurt them. The last part of verse 3, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. He sealed 144,000 people. It's for divine protection. They will be preserved through these events until Jesus Christ blasts His way through the atmosphere of this earth and resurrects everyone that are His saints, dead or alive. And we're caught up to the sea of glass, given our reward, and then Jesus' work is set out to restore all things. Brethren, while there is bad news coming over the horizon, you and I can be a part of the good news. We can be a part of those who want to preserve life on planet Earth by obeying the true and the living God from all of our heart. By being willing to change if we're wrong. When we prove all things from the Scripture, how to live and how God expects it, we can qualify to be a part of the solution with Jesus Christ as our head, not a part of the problem for violating the everlasting covenant.